coffee.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a huge pleasure to contribute to this debate on farming, and reflecting on many of the other speeches that have already been made. It just shows how important it is in our national security. Farmers' primary purpose is to produce the fine food that we enjoy, and we need them to keep doing that. We need them to have a good reward and fair reward for doing that. And we also need their help to protect and conserve the countryside and the natural environment. As the Member of Parliament for Suffolk Coastal, I'm blessed to represent such a special part of our country, well known for its pigs, potatoes and parsnips, but also for much more, whether it's poultry and indeed its very splendid natural environment. I think one of the things that is, ever since I've become a Member of Parliament, I refer to this in my maiden speech, is the importance of listening and learning to those who expertly rear, who expertly grow so much of what we choose to enjoy in this country, but also where we want to help them also get best value by making sure that the best British food is also valued right around the world. Now, in terms of one of the challenges, I think, in trying to do a national policy in this regard, which was eloquently set out actually by my right honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth, is that when you're trying to go from a situation where it was a blanket 85% based on a particular characteristic, bit of environmental here and there for the other 15%, actually as we go forward and recognise actually the difference between the United Kingdom of the different administrations that are in place, what we're seeing is some pretty dogged elements in Wales where people are actually being instructed that in order to get any support at all, they have to give up quite a lot of their land instead of potential improvements to farming. But I'm also very conscious that on the front line, those challenges do vary sector by sector, county by county, and often a lot of that is also drawn from the very soil, which is so different. Even in one road in my constituency, the A12, the soil varies just from one side to the other. So there are different challenges which we recognise farmers do day in, day out in order to have a fruitful industry. And in terms of, that is also true in a number of ways on whether it's about water. Right now, farmers have got way too much water, whereas often in my part of the country, there's often concerns about, in terms of drought, restrictions on abstraction, but also some of the other challenges that comes, of course, which we're seeing now with potential issues to do with yield. So to that end, I think one of the things is that we continue to have to be agile, flexible, listen to feedback, and not have, at times, the history of the RPA, which is a computer says no, but to undertake that analysis and to consider carefully about those policies that we are pursuing, as my right honourable friend set out, but to make sure that we also stick to our target that we have put in place, that in terms of distribution of the funding that is going right across the country, is that we want to make sure that we have 70% of land, agricultural land, and 70% of holdings participating in ELMS in the future by 2028. And I'd be grateful for an update from the Minister on where we are on that. In terms of one of the other aspects that I think has worried farmers potentially, and in terms of food security, is about some farmers considering they should opt out of food production in its entirety. And that is not something that ELMS was designed to do. In my belief that we should consider putting a restriction on how much land could be taken out of that sort of production, because as my right honourable friend said, there is opportunity to improve productivity of much of our aspects of our farming sector in order to get that food security which we all believe is vital. But I do think that we need to undertake, and I hope that officials are continuing or have finished the analysis that I commissioned, that we don't just look at the national incomes and the average that's being related to, but to look almost constituency by constituency, certainly county by county, to get a sense of whether people are taking up the opportunities that are there. To give you an example, there are about 305 farmers in Suffolk Coastal who are eligible for BPS. By the way, BPS has not applied to quite a lot of farmers in my constituency. Pig farmers in particular stand out. But so far, only 55 have applied for SFI in this current year. And as I said, despite the fact that there has been opened up for pig farmers. So I think it is worthwhile undertaking that analysis, and that's why I've asked the RPA to share with me the recipients of BPS. I don't want to know how much they earn from it, but I do want to understand why it is that people are not taking up those opportunities, again, so that we listen and get feedback. And this is one of the things that I thought was really important. We have a fine farming minister. The Right Honourable Member for Sherwood is very well experienced. Indeed, after lawyers and trade union officials, I expect farmers is probably the number one occupation of members of Parliament after that. Well, certainly on these benches, if not more broadly. And being alert to those issues, which frankly at times only government can really help and intervene, is really important to understand. But also, what are the barriers to getting people to participate? I think biosecurity continues to be the issue that should keep most politicians awake at night about what the impact that could have. And we've already heard about the issues to do with bovine TB. That's why I absolutely believe that we should continue to cull until we're into that more stable element, and why we are still getting the advance of science and the way that we can do vaccinations applied much more readily. This, I think we should also be, we have made sure that we are tightening up issues at the borders. But I'd be grateful if my honourable friend would update us on where we are with Weybridge, because it's really important that we have that upgrade that is done to make sure that we can assess those issues. In terms of protecting the countryside, I'm delighted that the Labour Party has abandoned its right to roam. I think it has listened to farmers. I hope it will listen a bit more on some of the issues I've just referred to in terms of bovine TB, but also the use of chemicals and pesticides. And these are not applied, frankly, willy-nilly. They cost actually a lot of money to farmers. But it's important that we continue to make sure we have an appropriate way that we deploy what science can gives us, while still also, understandably, being concerned about the impact on the natural environment. The two can go hand in hand. And that is absolutely vital, because frankly, if the farmers do not and landowners do not help us with supporting the natural environment, then it doesn't matter what scheme, it might be the best scheme in the world, but if it isn't being taken up, then we will fail. So that's why having a practical and pragmatic approach continues to be really important in that regard. Now, in terms of farming, we've already heard about skills and visas and similar. I must admit I was delighted when the Right Honourable Member for Harlow, the Education Minister, listened to the concerns raised by my local agricultural college. And in terms of T-levels, which are replacing BTECs, there was a gap in that pig husbandry was not included in the curriculum. And again, this is part of the challenge of having national approaches, and the organisation at the time were basically saying there wasn't enough demand for it. Well, there was, certainly in Suffolk Coastal and in other parts of the country, and I'm delighted that the government listened and is making sure that that is now going to go into the curriculum. In terms of the progress that we've made, it has been a journey. If I think about my right honourable friend, the member Surrey Heath, he did write the blueprint, Health and Harmony, ably assisted by my right honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth. And I think it's fair to say that through the creation of the Agriculture Act, my right honourable friend set in place, if you like, the architecture. But I think it's also fair to say that when some things aren't quite working, it's okay to have a few tweaks along the way. And that's not a failure of where we are. The direction of travel is still there. But we do have to have something, as I say, that works. Now, coming back to, in particular, to Suffolk, water is one of our bigger challenges. And the local micro economy, as it were, in terms of climate, is pretty much actually like Israel. So there are parts of East Anglia which are exceptionally dry, and the new president of the NFU, Tom Bradshaw, will know that very well with his farming in Essex. And that's why I was delighted several years ago to help support the creation of the Felixstowe hydrocycle. In fact, it's so good, it was in the plan for water 4 times at 9 Sistance. Because as we talk about water, we need to know, while there are plenty of farmers right now who've got too much water, quite often we don't have enough. And the risk to future production is really important when the Environment Agency is trying to balance a variety of environmental regulations alongside what can be done. for making sure that farmers have enough water to grow crops. So I think one of the things that I've been trying to do was to get permitted development rights for small level reservoirs. I'd like to encourage my honourable friend to still pursue that within government, and indeed the role of IDBs, internal drainage boards, are vital and sensible in how we try and manage that delicate balance. In terms of welfare, we do have the highest standards in the world, and I'm very conscious of that, and I'm also conscious of the concerns that people have that we don't all play by the same rules. That happened while we were still in the European Union, and we still see some of the challenges that addresses in terms of our trade agreement that we have with the European Union, but I think it's important that we continue to make sure that we market that not only within this country but elsewhere in the world, and it's why it was right to reject a lot of the calls from foreign markets about why they should come into this country, and I was pleased that the Prime Minister stood up for British farming at the time. I will.
I'm sorry to interrupt her, and I'm grateful to her for giving way, but would she agree that it is vitally important that when we negotiate future trade deals, that we do include in those deals that Britain has some of the highest welfare standards in the world, and that we shouldn't sacrifice those standards for the sake of doing a trade deal?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise that point, and indeed it's one of our selling points in terms of our trade deals about what we sell abroad, and that people recognise that brand, and there are other ways the industry themselves have tried to promote their elements. But what I would say is that in terms of, there's still a lot of clamour in this country to do even more ratcheting of welfare, what happens here in this country, on the idea that somehow the rest of the world will automatically follow us. Well, frankly, we've still got to try and get the European Commission to implement all the European rules, rather than the derogations that are still in existence or the lack of enforcement. And I would rather that we focus on people in this country who aren't following the rules, rather than necessarily ratcheting further. But I hear what he says about matters from other parts of the world. Indeed, we need to make sure that farming is fit for the future. There aren't many other sectors where across the United Kingdom the UK government does give out over £3 billion a year to support an industry, and it is that change that we've done about moving to public services, public money for public good. But I think that we can continue to go further in making sure that our funding things are fair for tenant farmers, that they are fair in terms of the contracts that we have. And I don't believe that government should get involved directly in setting prices. There are some delicacies, and we've seen that recently with sugar beet, where ministers did have to crack heads together in order to get a reasonable outcome. But I think that we also need to crack on with many of the other Brexit bonuses, including we passed the Precision Breeding Act, and we now need the Food Standards Agency to get on with getting the regulations in place so that we can take full advantage of that. At the same time, in terms of Brexit advantages, we should also be getting the FSA and DEFRA to really take advantage of the opportunity to deregulate. And deregulate doesn't mean make things worse. It's actually about making things more straightforward. That's about things to do with small abattoirs. It's to do things like Trichinella testing. There hasn't been a case of Trichinella in over at least 20 years, if not even longer. That was a European problem. It was not a problem here in the UK. So I'd look forward to more deregulation coming along. In terms of, there's the other aspect to do with waste. There's no doubt that there are some challenges about pollution coming from farming. That's why 6 years ago there were regulations put in place to do with water. But I think recognise that we have been able to increase the amount of money that has gone into things like slurry covers and other aspects of managing that. There is plenty more that we can do in that regard. In terms of thinking about trade, undoubtedly quality is one of our big selling points, and I'm pleased that we were able to double the number of agricultural attaches, and we really need to take account of that. Indeed, I think we should be challenging the European Commission for the fact that France do seem to be putting up trade barriers. People do want to export our goods, and yet they cannot do so because there's no facilities in the ports in Dover or across from Dover in Calais that will indeed allow that to happen. And for me, that is a barrier to trade which we should be challenging through the committee. In terms of other aspects that have already been covered well today, we do need to make sure that there is availability of labour. I think there is more that we want to do in terms of investing in the future. I think also there are other aspects which I hope the Treasury will be looking into. There is tax relief that's passed on. We conscious of the ups and downs that we can experience in farming. That's why we brought in 5-year average tax relief. That was an important change. But there is a problem at the moment that as soon as people stop giving up land to the extra patches of the edge of their lands, that can then no longer necessarily get the tax relief that's then passed from generation to generation. Unlike, for example, if people bring in a solar farm where they sign a lease, if the lease is only for 20-25 years, they keep all of that tax benefit that they enjoy. So we need to see the same for nature too. In terms of, I'm conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that many people want to speak in today's debate. But I do want to make sure that we have a practical and pragmatic DEFRA in terms of its delivery. I do think that RPA does need to be agile, needs to be flexible, needs to listen to feedback. And a good example, it's the only, perhaps 1 or 2 times when ministerial instructions were flat refused to be delivered by officials and the agency. And this is again in feedback to going to visit farmers around the country, being out in the front line, what has been happening with certain aspects of mapping. And in order to simplify that, I think that we can go further and we need to make sure that absolutely happens. It's important that farmers have trust and confidence in our agency who delivers this, who has confidence and trust in the policy and has confidence and trust in that when ministers say that they want something changing, which will be simple, straightforward and frankly needed for farmers, that should be delivered without hesitation. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is much more I could say today. Being Secretary of State for DEFRA, being Secretary of State for Farming, was actually a very responsible job. It was a very worthwhile job, and at times a very challenging job, undoubtedly. But we should all make sure that we have farmers at the forefront of our minds when we think of the food that we eat, when we think of the animals that we see, when we think of the countryside that we enjoy, because frankly this country would be worse off without farmers, and that's why we need to make sure they're at the forefront.
Many of